All right, everybody. One of our regular contributors, Lee Linn from Calhoun, Georgia, was unable to be here live and in living color with us this week. She's off spending some quality time with her family, but she did want to leave behind some fun information, the folk art environment. Lee, are you there?
I'm here. I'm here,
Hey,
Ed.
Lee.
Hi
Are
there.
you going to talk to us about folk art in Georgia or something a little bit more
No,
national?
national. And the reason I'm not here is because I'm actually in a folk art environment this afternoon. Howard Finster's Paradise Garden in Summerville, Georgia, where my son is participating in an art show over there. And so I'm actually in a folk art environment today.
Good, good. What exactly is folk art, Lee?
Well, folk art.
What distinguishes it? What defines it?
Generally speaking, it's outside the mainstream, frequently untrained artists who kind of march to of course, most artists march to their own drummer, but naive, primitive paintings frequently, sometimes otherworldly looking. Um, um, it goes by a number of names: outsider artists, visionary artists, self-taught artists. Though in recent years, I think some of the people who consider themselves folk artists may have more training than earlier ones.
Is there a peak period? Was there an era or a time when folk art was dominant?
Well,
when it first began through the present, perhaps?
Well, the original folk art was things like itinerant painters painting portraits in colonial times, or people who designed weather vanes or stone pottery for use in the household. Those people were folk artists, original folk artists. Mm-hmm. The term nowadays applies more to, say, a painter who paints memory paintings of things when he was a child or she was a child, a baptism in a country church, picking apples in an orchard. Grandma Moses was in many ways a folk artist, but lately in the last 20, 30 years has really been a heyday for this type of art. There are big art shows. There are many dealers who specialize in this. There are TV shows about these artists. It's a big deal these days. It's a big deal, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, dive in and tell us more.
Okay.
I understand you've got some graphics to share with us.
Oh, yes, we do.
The stage is yours.
Okay, we'll get to the graphics in just a minute. Frequently, these artists create their own world. They want to share it with other people. And they could be termed visionary, not because they are ahead of their time or because they have a vision for the future, but because they literally say they have had visions. For example, Howard Finster, who is probably my favorite folk artist because it's someone that I knew, worked repairing bikes and would get fingerprints of paint on parts of the bicycle. And one day there were faces on these little fingerprints telling him, as he said, to do sacred art. And from this, Finster, who was a preacher, who made clocks that he sold, or clock cases that he sold at trade days around Northwest Georgia and Alabama, who repaired bicycles, who repaired radios, who did all kinds of things, became pretty much a full-time artist. And he, or some may have visions. Was a man in Kansas, M.T. Leggett, whose art commented on current affairs and politics, that he felt compelled to do caricatures of political figures, and that was part of his art world. Eddie Owens Martin, also known as Saint Ohm or Saint EOM, had visions of three travelers from the future who told him that he was now to be known as Saint Ohm, and that he was a Passaquanian and was to build a place in Georgia called Passaquan, which he did do. And we're going to talk about a really beautiful book about Passaquan. They may share their worlds in public, or they may be very private about them. Some artists art is a means of lessening grief after the death of a loved one, as Elvi Hull in Kosciuszko, Mississippi did. There is a place in Homestead, Florida, the Carl Castle. The creator of it, no one ever saw him working, and the rumors were that he had extraterrestrial or psychic help in creating the Carl Castle. And so there's a wide variety of these worlds around the country, around the world, actually. A lot of them in France. There are a good many French artists who have created these environments. But let's see, right now, we're going to take a little look at some of them around the country. Now, these are all places that I have been to. This is in Brownsville, Tennessee. It's Billy Tripp's Minefield Cemetery. And in addition to all of these signs and small constructions, he built enormous metal towers and managed to get this water tower. His constructions are next to a little strip mall just right in the middle of town. This is another view. You can see the strip mall in the background. This is in Lucas, Kansas, which is a town that is completely devoted to folk art and outsider art. And this is the Garden of Eden that was built by S.T. Dinsmore. This was his home. And here we have Adam and Eve and the snake. And many of his constructions are concrete, towering concrete constructions. This is a roadside at an intersection in Hanksville, Utah. And he actually charged $0.25 to walk around. He had a collection box out there. And we went there a couple of times. And the second time, we were really tempted to put $25 or $30 in the box and take home a piece of this stuff that was just lying around. I've always been kind of sorry that we didn't. This is actually an artist's studio near Fayetteville, Arkansas, in the Brooklyn Mountains, called Terra Studios. But their artwork is really strange figures like this, little cars running around on a little road, and lots and lots and lots of trolls, most of them naked and a lot of them blue. But it has been closed due to COVID, but it's a really fun place to go and visit, especially with children. This is another view from Lucas, Kansas. Everything in the town is devoted to folk art. This is in Georgia. This is up near Hollywood, Georgia, and it's an artist named Sam Granger, and this is Sam G. Land. And he has been featured in Atlanta publications fairly recently, and does a lot of interesting things. I have one of his pictures, and this is Mr. Leggett in Mullinville, Kansas, and a lot of these figures along the highway have political and cult and current event relationships. Now, he's been gone for several years, but he was a really nice guy. We bought a couple of paintings from him. He was featured on American Pickers at one time, but I'm not sure what's happened since his death. But I hope the people of Mullinville have kept this, because it was wonderful. It was just wonderful. This is Elvi Hull of Kosciuszko, Mississippi. Her son died, and she turned to art and filled her front yard with her constructions. She painted a lot of shoes and hung them on things too. And she took items like, I have an old computer monitor that she painted and decorated with beads and things. And inside her house, which was spotless, but there were paths between art, so that there would be a table that was covered in pieces that she had decorated. And there was a path like to her kitchen and a path to her bedroom, but extremely tidy, considering. And she was featured in the Kosciuszko Welcome Center, which is how we found out about her. And the lady there said, "Oh, just go see her. She loves to have company." And when we pulled up, she was out the door before we could even get out of the car, and went back a couple of other times. And she was just a delightful person. This is this is Carl Castle in Homestead, Florida, with visitors, and it is still open. Well, it's not open right now, but it is still open today. So that's the end of those. So we can go back to studio. And now, any art seems to beget lots and lots of books. And this is certainly true of this type of art. And I want to show you a few that are specifically about some of these artist worlds. And so now we have to, I'm going to close this one. There we go. Now I can get to the other one. Let's see if this works. Okay. This is a book about St. Ohm and Passaquan. It was written in the late 80s, and it is in his words to a large extent. He was interviewed by Tom Patterson, and Patterson has written a number of books on art. Some of the pictures in here are by Roger Manley, who has also done a good bit of research, and Manley has done some of the Weird State books, has been the author of some of those. This is the cover. This is the outside of the slipcase. I guess you'd call it a slipcase. It's really a fold-over case with these little bone clasps on the edges. And this is the actual book. This is really a beautiful example of book art. This is a picture of St. Ohm in Passaquan regalia, which looks very Indian, very Native American to me. And here, this is back, when he was still alive, and when the garden, when the environment was kept up. After his death by suicide in 1986, it really fell apart, and it was due to the efforts of the Columbus State University and the Kohler Foundation and a local foundation, the Passaquan Preservation Society, that it has been restored and opened back to the public a few years ago. It's only open on the weekends, but you can now go and see it. And I meant to wear. He made beads, paper and wooden beads to sell, made necklaces to sell at Passaquan, and I have one of those necklaces. I'm not sure whether the beads are actually done by him or not, but Passaquan folks do some art shows, and I have beads and a coloring book from there, so I can actually color some of his art. This is the book itself in with the case. Really a nice presentation, and these are two of his drawings that hang on my walls. You can see his signature right there. This one is actually signed on the back. And again, we have this ethnic or native sort of looking things. This looks more African than Native American, but this is typical of some of his work. Though the ink drawings are not necessarily so typical. Okay, then Howard Finster's Paradise Garden is... Finster was one of the earliest that started this heyday of folk art, and this is a book by his daughter Thelma, and in it does have a lot of pictures of early items. This snake, this mound of snakes, it may be one of the pieces that's now at the High Museum in Atlanta. The exhibit from the garden at the High is kind of strange to me because there's no dirt, there are no vines, there are no chickens walking around, there are no bugs. It looks kind of out of place. But here is a pile of old TV sets, some of the junk that he used to produce some of his art. Now, Howard didn't just share his art through his garden. he wrote his own books. And when I say he wrote his own books, he actually hand wrote the books. This was one of his books, Howard Finster, Man of Visions. And in it is a picture of my husband. In the 80s, we spent a good bit of time at Paradise Garden, and Howard would come to Calhoun and talk to Bob's English classes, and we got to know him pretty well. And we're not sure why that picture is where it is or anything like that. This was a church a block or so away from his house. He managed to acquire most of about a 4-block area around his house. And this was a church that he turned into what he called the world's folk art church. And it kind of has a wedding cake look to it. And in the last couple of years, the Garden Foundation has received a grant to restore that building, and it desperately needed restoring. He actually invited Bob to climb to the top of it when he was working on it, and Bob refused to set foot on the ladder. But you can see this is how he wrote his books. And it is very hard to follow. This one especially is mostly photos of people he knew or people he worked with or people who supported his work and comments about them. However, this was the first self-published book that he did. Howard Finster's Vision of 1982, Vision of 200 light years away, space born of 3 generations from Earth to the heaven of heavens. And I want to tell you what he says about this book. He said that it is an account of space travel. You have to read it to understand. It is a visionary sermon and work of art. Some of the pages, there are interlinear notations, which Finster said were there so people could read between the lines. It's a very difficult book to read if you wanted to read it, but it is an introduction both to the art of Howard Finster and to the mind of Howard Finster. He had already been discovered when this book was written and was kind of on the verge of worldwide fame. And copies of it are fairly hard to come by. It's not the only book like this that he did, but was his first one. This is a pile of mostly bicycle parts and TVs. He said that he took junk that people threw away and made it into art, and this is one of his stockpiles of artistic material. This is the folk art church. This picture is several years old, and you can tell that it's not in great shape. The original paths in the garden were all concrete inset with junk, all sorts of junk. They looked kind of like this. This is a wall, but the pathways were similar to that. And the foundation, for ease of getting around the garden and safety purposes, have done a lot of smooth concrete paths. And this is some more of the garden after it has been cleaned up. It's a lot of fun to go to. It's a lot of fun for kids. And it's interesting when you've been going there for 40 years to see changes that have been made. But the good thing is that it is now being taken care of. Of course, his family, and this is my favorite all-time picture. This is Howard out in front of his workshop, and this is my son Will when he was about 2. And we were over there visiting one day, and they both sat on the ground and waved at the camera, and we took his picture. It's rather grainy. It's an old picture, but Will has an enlargement of it that he displays when he does art shows. And he was influenced, to an extent by Howard, though he has had a little training and has his own style. But this is this building at one time was Howard's workshop. I showed you earlier the picture of the Garden of Eden in Lucas, Kansas. This was a little booklet that Mr. Dinsmore produced to sell when there were tours of the home itself. I don't think it's open to the public now, but copies of this, you can still find, on various search sites. Raw Vision magazine which is Outsider Art, Art Brut. It's an international magazine that's based in Chicago. Frequently has articles on art environments. And in this issue, which was last summer, Nellie Mae Rowe, who was a Georgia artist, was featured. And this is a picture of the outside of her home. This was a small environment, nothing like the acres of Paradise Gardens or Passaquan. This is an interesting book. The title is great, Self-Made Worlds, Visionary Folk Art Environments, because that's exactly what they are. And it features a lot of lesser known ones. And I don't have a copy. I've sold the only copy that I had, but it is a very interesting book and a good one for, someone who's interested in the environments and wants to find something new to go see. And the Weird USA and the Weird States guides are great sources to find out about local, lesser known environments, though they do feature famous ones like the Watts Towers, which is probably the outstanding art environment. And it survived the Watts riots and is, just a wonderful, amazing. The Simon Rodia, who built it, did it by himself, and I don't think he had extraterrestrial or psychic help, like the Carl Castle, but it is an amazing work of art, and is now a state park, so it's being taken care of. And this, Alan and I were talking about these folks yesterday. This is by a painting by Harold Newton, who was one of the Florida Highwaymen, a group of African-American men who some of them had a little bit of training, but who painted primarily landscape scenes, sold them along the highways from the trunks of their cars, I think beginning in the 40s, and their paintings bring a pretty price today. But this is one of those paintings, and if you ever had a chance to buy one, you certainly should. So if you have a chance to visit some of these environments, do. It's fun. Take a picnic, take your kids. It's a chance sometimes to meet the artist or to meet their descendants or to participate in the preservation of some of these places. For example, the show at Paradise Gardens today is a fundraiser for preservation of the garden, and also a way for artists who have not been doing shows the last year, to show some of their pieces. And be sure to take $25, $30 with you. And if you see something you like, buy it, and buy it right then, because the prices will go up.
Are those blue troglodytes for sale?
They were not. They were. I did buy a face jug there that's with the raku process that makes it kind of scaly looking and crackly looking, and I did buy that there, and it is it's blue, but the trolls were not for sale. But you could take courses there and participate in doing some of those pieces, that were on display there at the studio. But mostly what they sold they did a lot of little bluebirds and stuff like that, but the face
art
nice.
is great, but I have to say that the Finster handwritten books were my favorite.
They are wonderful. They are wonderful. The other one, this one is signed. These are being saved for my children. They have a copy each of these books, but Howard was a delightful man and a very sweet person, and he would stay up all night painting, and he numbered all his paintings. Later years, his family did as much of the work as he did, and so when you're buying a Finster, you need to buy a low number, like below 3,000 or 4,000, because it numbers in the tens of thousands. Mm-hmm. But he's what got us started on 40 years of collecting folk and outsider art.
Thank you, Lee. It's a fabulous tour of folk art across the country. I'm sure there's more. I'm going to start looking around my neck of the woods and see what we have up here.
You should. You should. I haven't been there, so I'm not sure what there is, but I'm sure there is something.
All right, real time, Lee. It's now Saturday afternoon. You're probably enjoying yourself with your family, and I hope you are, and we'll see you next weekend.
Okay, great.
All right, keep smiling.